Sarah doesn't have the leadership skills for this position, my coworker Jennifer said confidently to our director. She's just not management material. Little did Jennifer know that while she was busy spreading lies about me to steal my promotion, I had been secretly documenting everything. The recording device in my bag captured every false statement, every manipulated story, every calculated lie. And tomorrow, when the promotion decision was announced, Jennifer would discover that the truth has a way of surfacing at exactly the right moment. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I should probably start by introducing myself properly. My name is Sarah Martinez, and until 3 months ago, I believed that hard work and talent would naturally lead to career advancement. I thought that if you consistently delivered exceptional results, treated colleagues with respect, and maintained professional integrity, success would follow. I was about to learn how dangerously naive that belief could be in the wrong environment. At 31 years old, I had spent the last 3 years building what I thought was an unshakable reputation at Brookfield Communications, a mid-sized advertising agency nestled in the heart of downtown Phoenix. The building itself was one of those modern glass structures that reflected the Arizona sun in brilliant streaks, housing 12 floors of creative professionals, account managers, and strategic planners. Our marketing department occupied the entire 8th floor, with large windows overlooking the bustling streets below and the desert mountains in the distance. My journey to Brookfield hadn't been conventional. After graduating from Arizona State University with a degree in marketing and communications, I had spent 2 years at a small startup in Tempe, learning the business from the ground up. The startup eventually folded, not due to poor performance, but because the founder decided to relocate to Seattle and pursue a different venture entirely. While the closure was disappointing, it had given me invaluable experience in wearing multiple hats, understanding every aspect of marketing operations, and developing the analytical skills that would later become my signature strength. When I joined Brookfield as a junior marketing analyst, I was determined to prove myself through measurable results rather than office politics. The company culture seemed to support this approach. During my first week, my supervisor, Patricia Williams, had emphasized that Brookfield valued innovation, collaboration, and data-driven decision-making. The agency had built its reputation by delivering campaigns that not only won creative awards, but also produced tangible business results for clients. I threw myself into every project with the intensity of someone who genuinely loved the work. Marketing strategy wasn't just my job, it was my passion. I found myself staying late not because I had to, but because I was genuinely excited about analyzing consumer behavior patterns, identifying market opportunities, and crafting campaigns that could transform how brands connected with their audiences. My colleagues often joked that I treated spreadsheets like other people treated novels, finding stories and possibilities hidden in the numbers. Within 6 months, my analytical approach had caught the attention of senior management. I had identified a significant gap in our client retention strategy that was costing the agency approximately $200,000 annually in lost business. More importantly, I had developed a comprehensive solution that not only addressed the immediate problem but created a framework for predicting and preventing similar issues in the future. The implementation of my recommendations resulted in a 34% improvement in client retention over the following year. This success led to my promotion to Senior Marketing Analyst, a position that came with increased responsibilities and the opportunity to lead campaign development for major accounts. I was assigned to work directly with some of Brookfield's most important clients, including Henderson Industries, a manufacturing company looking to modernize their brand image, and Morrison Enterprises, a retail chain seeking to expand into digital markets. The Henderson campaign became my first major leadership test. The client was struggling with an outdated brand perception that positioned them as traditional and inflexible, despite significant investments in modern technology and sustainable practices. After conducting extensive market research and consumer sentiment analysis, I developed a comprehensive rebranding strategy that emphasized their innovation and environmental commitment while maintaining the reliability and quality associations that had built their reputation. The campaign launch exceeded every projected metric. Brand awareness increased by 47% within the first quarter. Positive sentiment scores improved by 62%. And most importantly, Henderson reported a 28% increase in new customer acquisitions directly attributable to the rebranding effort. The success was so significant that it earned recognition from the Phoenix Business Journal and resulted in Henderson extending their contract with Brookfield for an additional 3 years. Following the Henderson success, I was assigned to lead the Morrison Enterprises digital transformation campaign. This project was even more complex, requiring coordination across multiple departments and integration of traditional advertising with cutting-edge digital marketing strategies. I spent weeks developing relationships with Morrison's internal teams, understanding their operational challenges, and identifying opportunities where marketing could support broader business objectives. The Morrison campaign became a case study in integrated marketing excellence. By combining data-driven customer segmentation with creative storytelling and strategic channel optimization, we helped Morrison increase their online sales by 112% while simultaneously improving customer satisfaction scores. The campaign won 2 industry awards and generated enough positive publicity to attract 5 new clients to Brookfield. My success with major accounts led to increased visibility within the company and growing recognition as someone who could bridge the gap between creative vision and business results. I began mentoring junior staff members, sharing the analytical frameworks I had developed and encouraging them to think strategically about their creative work. These mentoring relationships were among the most rewarding aspects of my role, watching talented young professionals develop confidence and skills that would serve them throughout their careers. It was during this period of professional growth and recognition that Jennifer Walsh joined our team. I remember her first day clearly because she made such a strong impression on everyone. Jennifer was 29, with perfectly styled blonde hair, an MBA from a respected program in California, and a confident presentation style that immediately commanded attention. She had relocated to Phoenix for what she described as a fresh start, leaving behind a marketing coordinator position at a larger agency in Los Angeles. From the beginning, Jennifer demonstrated an impressive ability to network and build relationships with key decision-makers. She had a natural charm that put people at ease and a talent for making herself indispensable through small favors and thoughtful gestures. Within her first month, she had volunteered to organize the department's quarterly social events, had offered to assist with several high-priority projects, and had established regular coffee meetings with Michael Torres, our department director. Initially, I admired Jennifer's proactive approach and her evident ambition. The marketing field is competitive, and I respected anyone who was willing to work hard to advance their career. When she approached me during her second week asking for advice about adapting to Brookfield's culture and expectations, I was happy to share my insights and offer support. Our early interactions were positive and collegial. Jennifer seemed genuinely interested in learning from my experience with major accounts, and I appreciated having a colleague who understood the strategic aspects of marketing beyond just creative execution. She asked thoughtful questions about my analytical methods, requested copies of framework documents I had developed, and expressed admiration for the results I had achieved with Henderson and Morrison. Looking back now, I realize that these early conversations were the beginning of Jennifer's systematic study of my work methods and professional relationships. At the time, however, I interpreted her interest as the natural curiosity of an ambitious professional seeking to excel in a new environment. I shared information freely, introduced her to key contacts, and even included her as an observer in client meetings so she could better understand how major accounts were managed. The first subtle warning sign came about 2 months after Jennifer's arrival. I was presenting quarterly performance metrics to the senior leadership team when Michael made a comment that surprised me. He mentioned that Jennifer had provided valuable insights about client relationship management strategies that had helped inform his own thinking about account development. The comment was brief and seemed innocuous, but it puzzled me because Jennifer hadn't been involved in any client relationship management discussions or strategy development. When I later asked Jennifer about her conversation with Michael, she explained that he had simply asked for her impressions as a newcomer to the team about how Brookfield's client service compared to her previous agency's approach. Her explanation was reasonable, but I noticed that she seemed slightly uncomfortable during our conversation, avoiding direct eye contact and changing the subject quickly. The second warning sign occurred during a department meeting focused on campaign development best practices. Michael was leading a discussion about innovation in strategic planning when he referenced what he described as Jennifer's insightful analysis of market research methodologies. He specifically mentioned her observations about the importance of combining quantitative data analysis with qualitative consumer insights, and how this integrated approach could improve campaign effectiveness. I recognized those observations immediately because they were core elements of the analytical framework I had developed and shared with Jennifer during one of our mentoring conversations. The methodology Michael described was essentially a simplified version of the approach I had used successfully for both the Henderson and Morrison campaigns. Yet Jennifer had apparently presented these concepts to Michael as her own insights rather than acknowledging their source. This incident troubled me more than the first because it suggested a pattern rather than an isolated misunderstanding. I decided to address the situation directly with Jennifer, approaching her after the meeting to clarify what had happened. When I mentioned that Michael's description sounded very similar to the framework we had discussed, Jennifer seemed genuinely surprised and apologetic. She explained that during her conversation with Michael, she had been trying to demonstrate her understanding of strategic marketing principles and had inadvertently presented ideas in a way that might have implied they were her original thoughts. She assured me that she had never intended to take credit for my work and promised to be more careful about attribution in future discussions with management. Her response seemed sincere, and I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. Everyone makes mistakes when adapting to a new workplace culture, and I didn't want to create unnecessary tension over what might have been an honest error in communication. I suggested that in the future, when discussing concepts we had explored together, she might mention our collaborative conversations to provide appropriate context. Jennifer thanked me for raising the issue and assured me that she valued our professional relationship too much to let misunderstandings create problems between us. She even suggested that we should find opportunities to collaborate more formally on projects so that our individual contributions would be clearly documented and recognized. At the time, this suggestion seemed like evidence of her commitment to professional integrity and our continued positive working relationship. The third month of Jennifer's tenure at Brookfield coincided with the announcement that Patricia Williams, our marketing manager, would be leaving the company to accept a position with a client firm that had offered her a significant advancement opportunity. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Patricia's departure created an immediate opening for promotion within our department, and it was widely understood that the new marketing manager would play a crucial role in shaping the department's strategic direction and managing relationships with our most important accounts. When Michael announced that the company would be conducting an internal search for Patricia's replacement, I felt a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. The marketing manager position represented exactly the kind of advancement I had been working towards since joining Brookfield. My track record with major accounts, my analytical expertise, and my mentoring relationships with junior staff had prepared me well for the increased responsibilities that would come with the role. The promotion process was scheduled to unfold over 6 weeks, allowing time for interested candidates to submit formal applications, participate in interviews with senior leadership, and present strategic vision proposals to the executive team. Michael emphasized that the selection would be based on demonstrated results, leadership potential, and the ability to continue building Brookfield's reputation for delivering exceptional client outcomes. I spent considerable time preparing my application materials, documenting the measurable results I had achieved across various campaigns, and outlining my vision for department growth and development. I was particularly excited about presenting ideas I had been developing for expanding Brookfield's capabilities in digital marketing analytics and customer experience optimization. These were areas where I believed our agency could differentiate itself from competitors and provide even greater value to clients. Jennifer also submitted an application for the marketing manager position, which initially surprised me given her relatively short tenure with the company. However, I recognized that her previous experience and MBA credentials certainly qualified her to be considered for the role. I assumed that the selection process would naturally favor candidates with longer track records at Brookfield and deeper relationships with existing clients, but I respected Jennifer's ambition in pursuing the opportunity. What I didn't anticipate was how dramatically the workplace dynamics would shift once the promotion process began. Within days of the announcement, I started noticing subtle changes in how colleagues interacted with me. Conversations that had previously been warm and collaborative became more formal and guarded. Colleagues who had regularly sought my input on projects began consulting with Jennifer instead, and I found myself excluded from informal planning discussions that I would normally have been invited to join. The changes were gradual enough that I initially attributed them to the natural tension that emerges during competitive promotion processes. It's common for workplace relationships to become more complicated when colleagues are competing for the same advancement opportunity. I assumed that once the selection was made, regardless of the outcome, normal collaborative patterns would resume. However, as the weeks progressed, the changes became more pronounced and systematic. I began to notice that Jennifer was having frequent private conversations with Michael, often behind closed doors in his office. These meetings seemed to occur regularly, sometimes daily, and always involved animated discussions that I could observe through the glass walls of Michael's office, though I couldn't hear the specific content. More concerning was the shift in how my own work was being received and discussed. Projects that had previously generated enthusiastic responses from colleagues and management began receiving more lukewarm reactions. Ideas that I proposed during team meetings were met with polite acknowledgement rather than the engaged discussion they had typically sparked. Most puzzling was the sense that my professional relationships, which had taken months to develop and strengthen, were somehow becoming strained without any clear explanation. The most significant warning sign came during a client presentation for a potential new account. I had spent weeks developing a comprehensive marketing strategy for Davidson Corporation, a technology company seeking to expand their market presence in the Southwest. The presentation was scheduled to include Michael, Jennifer, and myself, with Jennifer attending as an observer to gain experience with major account development processes. During the presentation, I outlined the strategic framework I had developed, including detailed market analysis, competitive positioning recommendations, and a phased implementation timeline. The Davidson executives responded positively to the proposal, asking detailed questions about methodology and expressing particular interest in the analytical tools I had demonstrated for measuring campaign effectiveness. What surprised me was Jennifer's active participation in the question and answer session. Rather than simply observing, she began offering additional insights and elaborations on the strategies I had presented. While her contributions were generally accurate and helpful, they created the impression that she had been more involved in developing the proposal than was actually the case. After the presentation, the Davidson executives specifically complimented what they perceived as our collaborative approach to strategy development. They expressed appreciation for what they described as the seamless integration between analytical rigor and creative vision that Jennifer and I had demonstrated. From their perspective, we had functioned as a unified team, with both of us contributing equally to the strategic thinking behind the proposal. While I was pleased that the presentation had been successful, I was troubled by the misimpression that had been created about Jennifer's role in developing the strategy. When I later mentioned this concern to Jennifer, she explained that she had simply been trying to support the presentation by demonstrating her understanding of the concepts we had discussed during our preparation meetings. Her explanation was reasonable, but it highlighted a pattern that was becoming increasingly problematic. Jennifer had a talent for positioning herself as more central to strategic discussions and project development than her actual contributions warranted. She accomplished this not through overt false claims, but through subtle implications and strategic omissions that allowed others to draw incorrect conclusions about her role and expertise. This pattern was particularly concerning, because it was affecting my professional relationships in ways that were difficult to address directly. How do you confront someone for creating misleading impressions without sounding petty or paranoid? How do you prove that credit is being inappropriately shared when the sharing happens through implication rather than explicit claims? As the promotion process entered its final phase, these questions became increasingly urgent. I realized that Jennifer wasn't simply competing for the marketing manager position through her own merits and qualifications. She was systematically undermining my candidacy by creating doubt about my leadership capabilities, while simultaneously enhancing her own perceived contributions to department success. The most troubling aspect of this realization was recognizing how sophisticated and calculated Jennifer's approach had been from the very beginning. Her early requests for mentoring and collaboration hadn't been driven by genuine professional development interests. Instead, they had been strategic intelligence gathering, designed to give her detailed knowledge of my work methods, client relationships, and professional achievements that she could later leverage for her own advancement. I was facing a challenge I had never encountered before in my professional life. I had always believed that excellence in work performance would speak for itself, that objective results would be valued over subjective political maneuvering. I was about to learn that in some environments, perception can be more powerful than reality, and that protecting your professional reputation requires active vigilance rather than passive confidence in your own abilities. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test everything I believed about workplace fairness, professional integrity, and the power of systematic truth-telling in the face of calculated deception. Jennifer had spent months positioning herself as my equal or superior through strategic manipulation of information and relationships. Now it was time to see whether documentation and evidence could overcome the narrative she had so carefully constructed. The turning point came on a Tuesday morning in late September when I arrived at the office early to prepare for a crucial presentation to the executive committee. As I walked past Michael's office, I noticed that his door was slightly ajar, and voices were coming from inside. This wasn't unusual since Michael often held early morning meetings, but something about the tone of the conversation made me pause. Jennifer's voice carried clearly through the gap in the door, and what I heard made my blood run cold. She was describing what she called my concerning pattern of taking sole credit for collaborative efforts, and suggesting that my leadership style might be too individualistic for effective team management. The conversation was clearly about the upcoming promotion decision, and Jennifer was systematically dismantling my reputation with carefully crafted criticisms that sounded professional and concerned rather than malicious. I stood frozen in the hallway, listening as Jennifer explained to Michael that she felt uncomfortable bringing this up, but believed it was her responsibility to share these observations for the good of the department. She described incidents that I knew had never occurred, presenting them as examples of my poor collaboration skills and lack of team awareness. The most shocking moment came when she referenced the Henderson campaign, claiming that my presentation had failed to acknowledge the significant contributions of junior team members who had supposedly provided crucial insights. This was completely false. The Henderson campaign had been my individual project from conception to execution, with clearly documented solo responsibility that had been established from the beginning. Jennifer had not even been employed at Brookfield when the campaign was developed and launched. Yet she was speaking with such conviction and specific detail that someone unfamiliar with the actual circumstances would have no reason to doubt her account. I quietly moved away from Michael's office before they could discover my presence, but my mind was racing with the implications of what I had just heard. Jennifer wasn't simply competing for the promotion through her own merits. She was actively sabotaging my candidacy by spreading false information designed to create doubt about my professional capabilities and character. The sophistication of her approach was breathtaking and terrifying. Over the next few days, I began paying closer attention to Jennifer's interactions with colleagues and management, and a disturbing pattern emerged. She had been having similar conversations with multiple people throughout the department, each time presenting herself as a reluctant but responsible colleague, sharing difficult observations about my leadership style and collaborative abilities. The conversations always followed the same format: expressions of respect for my technical skills, coupled with concerns about my interpersonal approach and team management capabilities. What made Jennifer's campaign particularly effective was how she framed her criticisms around legitimate management concerns. Rather than making obviously false accusations, she focused on subjective areas like leadership style, communication approach, and team dynamics where her claims would be difficult to disprove. She presented herself as someone who had observed these issues firsthand and felt obligated to share her concerns for the good of the department and the company. The genius of this approach was that it positioned Jennifer as a thoughtful, responsible professional, while casting doubt on my suitability for promotion without making any statements that could be easily verified or challenged. If confronted about her claims, she could always insist that she was sharing her honest perceptions and professional observations, rather than making factual assertions about specific events or behaviors. I realized that I was facing a sophisticated form of professional sabotage that had been months in the making. Jennifer's early requests for mentoring and collaboration had given her detailed knowledge of my work methods, client relationships, and project histories that she was now using to construct credible-sounding criticisms. Her strategic networking with management had established her credibility as a reliable source of department insights, making her subsequent claims about my leadership deficiencies more likely to be believed and acted upon. The most frustrating aspect of Jennifer's campaign was how difficult it was to combat directly. How do you prove that conversations about your leadership style are based on false perceptions? How do you demonstrate that criticism of your collaborative approach is unfair when the criticism is presented as subjective professional opinion, rather than factual claims? How do you defend against character assassination that is conducted through private conversations with decision-makers who then view you through the lens of the negative information they have received? I spent several sleepless nights trying to figure out how to respond to this situation. My first instinct was to confront Jennifer directly and demand that she stop spreading false information about me. However, I realized that this approach would likely be counterproductive. Jennifer could easily deny making inappropriate claims, and could potentially use my confrontation as evidence of the defensive, difficult personality she was already suggesting I possessed. My second thought was to speak directly with Michael about the false information I suspected Jennifer was sharing. But without concrete evidence of her claims or documentation of our conversations, this approach would essentially become a case of my word against hers. Given that Jennifer had been systematically building relationships and establishing credibility with management over several months, I wasn't confident that my version of events would be given equal weight. It was during this period of strategic thinking that I remembered a conversation I had had with my sister Carmen, who worked as a human resources director for a large corporation in Denver. Carmen had shared stories about workplace situations where employees had been victims of systematic harassment or sabotage, and her advice had always been the same: documentation is everything. Without written records, witness statements, or recorded evidence, workplace disputes typically come down to subjective judgments about credibility and character. This conversation sparked an idea that would ultimately change everything. If Jennifer was conducting her campaign against me through private conversations with management and colleagues, and if she was making false claims that were difficult to challenge directly, then perhaps the solution was to begin documenting these interactions systematically. Rather than trying to prevent Jennifer from having these conversations, I could focus on creating an accurate record of what was actually being said and done. The decision to start recording workplace conversations was not one I made lightly. I researched the legal implications thoroughly, confirming that Arizona's recording laws allowed for the documentation of conversations where at least one party consents to the recording. Since I would be present for any conversations I recorded, this requirement would be met. I also consulted with an employment attorney to ensure that my documentation efforts would not violate any company policies or create legal liabilities for myself. Armed with this knowledge, I purchased a small digital recording device that could be discreetly carried in my purse or pocket. The device was voice-activated and had sufficient battery life and storage capacity to record several hours of conversation. I began carrying it with me to all workplace interactions, particularly meetings where Jennifer was present, or discussions that involved department leadership and strategic planning. The first recorded conversation that proved significant occurred during a team meeting focused on client account management strategies. Michael had called the meeting to discuss ways to improve our approach to major account retention and growth, and he had specifically invited senior staff members to share insights and recommendations based on their experience with key clients. During the meeting, Jennifer made several contributions that immediately caught my attention. She discussed what she described as lessons learned from the Henderson campaign about the importance of stakeholder engagement and client communication throughout the rebranding process. She spoke with confidence about specific challenges that had emerged during the campaign and described strategic adjustments that had been made to address client concerns and ensure project success. Everything Jennifer said about the Henderson campaign was accurate and insightful. The problem was that she had not been involved in the campaign in any capacity and had no direct knowledge of the challenges and solutions she was describing. She was essentially presenting my work experience and strategic insights as her own professional knowledge, creating the impression that she had been responsible for the successful management of one of our department's most significant client relationships. What made this particularly disturbing was how Jennifer wove these false claims into a broader discussion about account management best practices. Rather than simply stealing credit for specific projects, she was appropriating my professional expertise and experience as evidence of her own capabilities and qualifications. Anyone listening to her contributions would naturally conclude that she had extensive experience managing major client relationships and had developed sophisticated strategies for handling complex rebranding projects. The recording captured not only Jennifer's false claims, but also Michael's response to her contributions. He expressed appreciation for what he called her valuable insights, and specifically mentioned that her experience with challenging client situations would be an asset in the marketing manager role. The conversation provided clear evidence that Jennifer's misrepresentations were directly influencing management's perception of her qualifications and suitability for promotion. Over the following weeks, I continued documenting conversations and interactions, building a comprehensive record of Jennifer's campaign against me. The recordings revealed the full scope of her strategy, which was even more systematic and calculated than I had initially realized. She wasn't simply making occasional false claims about my work or character. She was conducting a sophisticated disinformation campaign designed to rewrite the history of our department's achievements and reposition herself as the driving force behind successes that had actually been accomplished by others. One particularly damaging conversation occurred between Jennifer and Lisa Chen from Human Resources. Jennifer had requested a private meeting with Lisa to discuss what she described as her concerns about department dynamics and team collaboration. During this conversation, which I was able to record when Jennifer asked me to walk with her to Lisa's office and wait outside while they met, Jennifer painted a picture of me as someone who created tension through my alleged insistence on individual recognition and resistance to collaborative approaches. Jennifer told Lisa that she had observed several instances where I had become defensive and confrontational, when other team members offered suggestions or alternative perspectives during project discussions. She described me as someone who paid lip service to collaboration while actually maintaining tight control over all strategic decisions and creative processes. Most damaging, she suggested that my leadership style was creating a toxic environment where junior staff members felt intimidated and hesitant to contribute their ideas. None of these characterizations were accurate. Throughout my tenure at Brookfield, I had consistently received positive feedback about my mentoring relationships with junior staff and my collaborative approach to project development. I had documentation of successful team projects where my leadership had been specifically praised by both colleagues and management. However, Jennifer's conversation with Lisa was framed as the concerned observations of a colleague who was reluctantly sharing difficult information for the good of the organization. The conversation between Jennifer and Lisa also revealed another disturbing dimension of Jennifer's strategy. She wasn't simply trying to damage my reputation for the promotion competition. She was laying groundwork for longer-term career sabotage by creating a formal HR record of alleged performance and behavior issues. If her claims were taken seriously and documented in my personnel file, they could affect not only the current promotion decision, but future advancement opportunities and professional references. As I continued my documentation efforts, I began to understand the full sophistication of Jennifer's approach. She had identified the key decision-makers and influencers who would be involved in the promotion process and had systematically built relationships with each of them. More importantly, she had studied the specific concerns and priorities that were most important to each individual and had tailored her conversations accordingly. With Michael, Jennifer focused on strategic thinking and client relationship management, areas where she knew he placed particular emphasis for leadership roles. With Lisa, she emphasized team dynamics and collaborative leadership, topics that were central to HR's evaluation criteria for management positions. With senior colleagues, she discussed industry trends and innovation opportunities, demonstrating what appeared to be sophisticated strategic thinking about the agency's competitive positioning. In each case, Jennifer supported her contributions with examples and insights that she had appropriated from my work and experience. She had essentially created a parallel professional identity that borrowed heavily from my actual achievements while positioning herself as the originator of strategies and solutions that had been developed by others. The most sophisticated aspect of Jennifer's campaign was how she used our early mentoring conversations and collaborative interactions as cover for her appropriation of my work. When questioned about the source of her insights or the basis for her strategic recommendations, she could truthfully reference discussions we had had or projects where she had been present as an observer. The fact that she had been included in client meetings and strategy sessions gave her sufficient familiarity with details and processes to speak convincingly about experiences that had not actually been hers. This approach also provided her with plausible deniability if confronted about taking credit for others' work. She could argue that her contributions were based on collaborative learning experiences and shared discussions rather than individual appropriation. The boundary between collaborative learning and credit theft could be deliberately blurred to her advantage, making it difficult to prove that her claims crossed the line into professional misconduct. As the promotion decision deadline approached, I realized that I needed more than just recorded evidence of Jennifer's false claims. I also needed to document the actual facts about project ownership, client relationships, and professional achievements that Jennifer was misrepresenting. This meant compiling a comprehensive record of my work history at Brookfield, including email communications, project timelines, client feedback, and performance evaluations. I spent several evenings after work organizing this documentation, creating a detailed timeline that showed the actual development and implementation of major campaigns and strategic initiatives. For each project that Jennifer had claimed involvement in or knowledge of, I assembled evidence showing my actual role and the accurate sequence of events. Email records were particularly valuable because they provided time-stamped proof of project ownership and decision-making authority. The Henderson campaign documentation was especially comprehensive because it had been such a significant success and had generated extensive written records. I had emails showing the initial client briefing, my solo development of the strategic framework, the presentation of concepts to both internal teams and client stakeholders, and the implementation timeline that I had managed throughout the campaign. The documentary evidence clearly showed that Jennifer had not been employed at Brookfield during the campaign development and had played no role in its conception, planning, or execution. Similarly, the Morrison campaign records demonstrated my leadership of the project from initial client consultation through final implementation and results analysis. I had performance evaluations that specifically praised my individual contributions to these campaigns, client testimonials that acknowledged my personal role in their success, and industry recognition that had been awarded based on my strategic leadership and innovative approach. Armed with both the recorded evidence of Jennifer's false claims and the documentary proof of the actual facts, I began to develop a strategy for exposing her deception. The challenge was finding the right moment and approach to present this information in a way that would be taken seriously by management while avoiding the appearance of petty workplace politics or personal vendetta. The opportunity came sooner than I expected, during what would become the final phase of Jennifer's campaign against me. She had apparently decided that subtle undermining was insufficient and that more direct action was needed to ensure her success in the promotion competition. This decision would ultimately lead to her downfall, but not before creating the most challenging professional crisis I had ever faced. The escalation began during a department meeting focused on strategic planning for the upcoming quarter. Michael had asked all senior staff members to present their vision for department growth and their specific recommendations for improving client service and campaign effectiveness. This was clearly intended as a final evaluation opportunity for promotion candidates, giving management a chance to assess our strategic thinking and leadership potential in a formal presentation setting. I had prepared extensively for this presentation, developing a comprehensive proposal that addressed both immediate operational improvements and longer-term strategic positioning for the department. My recommendations were based on detailed analysis of client feedback, industry trends, and competitive positioning, supported by specific metrics and implementation timelines. I was confident that the presentation would demonstrate both my analytical capabilities and my vision for department leadership. Jennifer was scheduled to present immediately after me, and I noticed that she had been taking detailed notes during my presentation, paying particular attention to the strategic frameworks and analytical methods I was discussing. At the time, I assumed she was simply being thorough in her preparation for her own presentation, but I would soon discover that she had a different purpose in mind. When Jennifer began her presentation, I was shocked to hear her discussing strategic concepts and analytical approaches that were remarkably similar to what I had just presented. While she didn't directly repeat my specific recommendations, her overall framework and methodology bore unmistakable similarities to the approach I had outlined. More troubling, she presented these concepts as original thinking that reflected her own strategic expertise and analytical capabilities. The similarities between our presentations created an awkward dynamic in the room, with several colleagues exchanging glances and Michael looking puzzled by what appeared to be duplicated thinking between two senior staff members. Jennifer handled this awkwardness by suggesting that the similarities demonstrated the strength of collaborative culture in our department and showed how shared strategic discussions had led to convergent thinking about department priorities. This explanation was clever because it reframed the apparent duplication as evidence of successful collaboration rather than inappropriate appropriation. However, it also created the impression that my presentation had been influenced by Jennifer's strategic thinking rather than the reverse. Anyone unfamiliar with the actual development of my recommendations would naturally assume that the ideas had emerged from collaborative discussions where both Jennifer and I had contributed equally. After the presentations concluded, Michael asked to speak with both Jennifer and me privately about our strategic recommendations and our vision for department leadership. This conversation would become the setting for the most direct confrontation between Jennifer and me, and it would ultimately provide the evidence I needed to expose her campaign of deception once and for all. The meeting was scheduled for the following morning, giving me one night to prepare for what I knew would be a crucial moment in determining not only the promotion outcome, but the future of my career at Brookfield Communications. The meeting with Michael was scheduled for 9 o'clock on a Wednesday morning, and I arrived at the office an hour early to review my documentation one final time. The digital recorder was fully charged and discreetly positioned in my blazer pocket, ready to capture whatever conversation was about to unfold. I had spent the previous evening organizing my evidence into a logical sequence, anticipating various scenarios and preparing responses that would expose Jennifer's deception while maintaining my own professional credibility. Michael's office felt different that morning, charged with intention that reflected the significance of the decisions being made. The walls were lined with awards and client recognition plaques that told the story of Brookfield's success over the past decade, achievements that had been built through the kind of strategic thinking and client relationship management that I had been demonstrating throughout my tenure. As I waited for Jennifer to arrive, I reflected on how much this moment would determine whether merit and truth would prevail over manipulation and deception. Jennifer entered the office precisely at 9, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the confident expression that had become her trademark during important professional interactions. She greeted both Michael and me with warm professionalism, as if we were simply colleagues gathering for a routine strategic discussion, rather than competitors in a high-stakes promotion battle where one person's advancement would come at the expense of the other's career trajectory. Michael began the meeting by explaining that he wanted to discuss our respective visions for the marketing manager position and explore how our different perspectives and experiences would shape the department's future direction. He emphasized that the decision would be based on demonstrated leadership capabilities, strategic thinking, and the ability to build collaborative relationships both within the department and with clients across various industries. The conversation started with general questions about management philosophy and strategic priorities, topics where both Jennifer and I could speak confidently without directly contradicting each other. However, the dynamic shifted dramatically when Michael asked us to discuss specific examples of successful client relationship management and campaign development that demonstrated our readiness for increased leadership responsibilities. Jennifer spoke first, and I listened with growing alarm as she described what she presented as her experience managing the Henderson Industries rebranding campaign. She spoke with remarkable detail about the challenges involved in repositioning a traditional manufacturing company for modern markets, the complexity of balancing heritage brand elements with contemporary messaging, and the analytical methods used to measure campaign effectiveness across multiple demographic segments. Everything Jennifer said about the Henderson campaign was technically accurate, but she was describing my work as if it had been her own leadership experience. She discussed strategic decisions I had made, analytical frameworks I had developed, and client relationship management approaches I had pioneered. Most disturbing was how she wove these false claims into a broader narrative about her leadership philosophy and her approach to managing complex client relationships under challenging circumstances. When Michael asked follow-up questions about specific aspects of the Henderson campaign, Jennifer answered with the kind of detailed knowledge that could only come from direct involvement or extensive documentation review. She knew client budget constraints, timeline pressures, and stakeholder concerns because she had access to all the project files and meeting notes that I had shared during our early mentoring conversations. Her responses were convincing precisely because they were based on accurate information about real events and decisions. The most shocking moment came when Jennifer described what she called her strategic approach to client communication during the campaign's most challenging phase. She explained how she had identified resistance among certain Henderson executives to the proposed brand changes and had developed a presentation strategy that addressed their concerns while maintaining the integrity of the overall rebranding concept. This presentation had indeed been a crucial turning point in the campaign, but it had been my individual work product, developed during several late nights when I had struggled to find the right balance between client concerns and strategic objectives. Jennifer's description of this presentation was so detailed and personal that anyone listening would naturally conclude she had been the primary architect of both the strategy and its implementation. She even referenced specific slides and talking points that I remembered creating, describing the thought process behind design decisions and the rationale for particular messaging approaches. The level of detail in her account made it virtually impossible for someone unfamiliar with the actual project history to doubt her claims. When it was my turn to discuss client relationship management experience, I found myself in the awkward position of describing the same campaigns and achievements that Jennifer had just claimed as her own work. I talked about the Henderson campaign from my perspective as its actual architect and manager, but my account inevitably sounded repetitive and potentially fabricated, given that Jennifer had just provided such a comprehensive description of the same events. Michael's expression during my portion of the discussion revealed his confusion about the apparent overlap in our experiences. He asked several clarifying questions about the division of responsibilities between Jennifer and me during the Henderson campaign, clearly trying to understand how both of us could claim such extensive involvement in what had been presented to management as an individually managed project with clear leadership accountability. I realized that this was the moment I had been preparing for since I first discovered Jennifer's campaign against me. Rather than continuing to compete with her false narratives on their own terms, I needed to shift the conversation toward verifiable facts and documented evidence. The recording device in my pocket was capturing every word of Jennifer's misrepresentations, but I also needed to introduce the broader pattern of deception that I had been documenting over the previous weeks. I began by acknowledging the confusion about campaign responsibilities and suggesting that perhaps we should clarify the actual timeline and documentation for the projects we had been discussing. I mentioned that I had been surprised to hear Jennifer describe such detailed involvement in the Henderson campaign, given that she had not been employed at Brookfield during its development and implementation phases. Jennifer's response to this observation was masterful in its calculated ambiguity. She explained that while she hadn't been formally involved in the Henderson campaign's execution, she had conducted extensive review of the project as part of her orientation process when joining Brookfield. She claimed that her detailed knowledge came from thorough study of the campaign materials and follow-up discussions with team members who had been involved in its implementation. This explanation was technically plausible while being fundamentally deceptive. Jennifer had indeed reviewed campaign materials during her orientation, but she had presented this secondhand knowledge as direct leadership experience. She had transformed her study of my work into claims about her own strategic thinking and client relationship management capabilities. The distinction between learning from someone else's work and taking credit for that work had been deliberately obscured. Michael seemed to accept Jennifer's explanation, but I could see that questions were beginning to form in his mind about the nature of our respective contributions to various projects. This was the opening I needed to begin introducing the evidence I had been collecting about Jennifer's systematic misrepresentation of her qualifications and achievements. I mentioned that I had been concerned about potential confusion regarding project ownership and individual contributions, particularly given the competitive nature of the promotion process. I suggested that perhaps we should review the actual documentation for the projects we had been discussing to ensure that everyone had accurate information about responsibilities and achievements. Jennifer's body language shifted noticeably when I mentioned documentation review. For the first time during the meeting, she appeared uncomfortable and defensive rather than confident and authoritative. She quickly suggested that focusing on past project details might not be the most productive use of our meeting time, and that we should instead concentrate on our forward-looking vision for the department's strategic direction. Michael, however, seemed intrigued by the possibility of clarifying project responsibilities through documentation review. He mentioned that accurate assessment of individual contributions was indeed important for promotion decisions, and that He would appreciate having clear information about each candidate's specific achievements and leadership experience. This was the moment when Jennifer made the tactical error that would ultimately expose her entire campaign of deception. Rather than accepting the documentation review or finding a graceful way to redirect the conversation, she chose to escalate. Her false claims about my character and professional capabilities. Perhaps she felt cornered by the prospect of having her misrepresentations exposed. Or perhaps she believed that a more aggressive approach was necessary to secure her advantage in the promotion competition. Jennifer turned to Michael and said that she felt compelled to share some concerns she had been having about my collaborative approach and leadership style. She explained that she had been reluctant to raise these issues because she respected my technical capabilities, but that she believed Michael deserved to have complete information when making such an important decision about department leadership. What followed was the most direct and damaging character assassination I had ever experienced in a professional setting. Jennifer described what she claimed were multiple instances of my allegedly poor leadership behavior, painting a picture of someone who was technically competent but fundamentally unsuited for management responsibilities due to personality and interpersonal shortcomings. She told Michael that I had a pattern of taking sole credit for collaborative efforts and failing to acknowledge the contributions of team members who had provided crucial insights and support for various projects. She claimed that junior staff members had expressed concerns to her about my allegedly dismissive attitude toward their ideas and my supposed resistance to alternative perspectives during strategic planning discussions. Most damaging was Jennifer's assertion that I had created what she called a toxic dynamic within the department by insisting on maintaining control over all strategic decisions while paying only lip service to collaborative leadership principles. She suggested that my promotion to marketing manager would likely result in decreased morale and productivity, as team members became increasingly frustrated with what she characterized as my authoritarian management style. Jennifer delivered these accusations with the perfect tone of reluctant professionalism, presenting herself as someone who was uncomfortable sharing negative information about a colleague, but felt obligated to ensure that management had accurate information for such an important decision. Her performance was so convincing that I could see Michael beginning to view me with new skepticism and concern. The accusations were particularly effective because they were constructed around legitimate management concerns that would naturally worry any director making a promotion decision. Questions about collaborative leadership, team morale, and interpersonal effectiveness are central to management evaluation processes, and Jennifer had crafted her criticisms to hit precisely these pressure points. What made the situation even more challenging was that Jennifer's accusations were difficult to disprove through simple contradiction. How do you prove that you haven't been dismissive of colleagues' ideas? How do you demonstrate that you haven't created a toxic work environment? How do you counter claims about your leadership style when those claims are presented as the observations of someone who has been working closely with you over an extended period? I realized that this was the moment when all of my documentation and evidence gathering would either prove its worth or fail to protect me from professional destruction. Jennifer had just made specific, detailed claims about my behavior and character that I knew to be false. More importantly, she had made these claims in a recorded conversation where her exact words and tone would be preserved as evidence of her willingness to fabricate serious allegations for personal advancement. Rather than immediately challenging Jennifer's accusations, I chose to let her continue talking while the recording device captured every word. The more specific and detailed her false claims became, the more powerful the evidence would be when I eventually presented the truth about our interactions and her systematic campaign of deception. Jennifer seemed to interpret my silence as an inability to defend against her accusations, and she became increasingly bold in her characterizations of my alleged leadership failures. She described specific incidents that she claimed had occurred during team meetings and project discussions, providing detailed accounts of my supposedly inappropriate responses to colleagues' suggestions and ideas. The incidents Jennifer described had never happened, but she presented them with such conviction and specific detail that they sounded entirely credible. She had clearly spent considerable time constructing these false narratives, ensuring that they included enough realistic elements to pass casual scrutiny while being devastating enough to seriously damage my candidacy for promotion. As Jennifer continued her character assassination, I found myself experiencing a curious mixture of anger and anticipation. I was furious about the false accusations and the systematic deception that had been building for months, but I was also anticipating the moment when I would be able to present the evidence that would expose Jennifer's lies and reveal the true nature of her character and professional ethics. The recording device in my pocket was capturing not only Jennifer's false accusations, but also the tone and manner in which she was delivering them. The contrast between her apparent reluctance to share negative information and her obvious satisfaction in destroying my reputation would be clear to anyone who listened to the recording. Her performance was effective in the moment, but it would not withstand careful analysis of her actual motivations and methods. When Jennifer finally concluded her litany of false accusations, Michael turned to me with an expression that combined concern, disappointment, and uncertainty. He asked whether I wanted to respond to the issues that Jennifer had raised, giving me the opportunity to defend myself against her claims or provide alternative perspectives on the incidents she had described. This was the moment I had been preparing for since I first realized the scope of Jennifer's campaign against me. I had extensive documentation of her false claims, recorded evidence of her misrepresentations, and comprehensive proof of the actual facts regarding project ownership and professional achievements. More importantly, I had just recorded her making specific false accusations that could be directly contradicted with objective evidence. I began my response by acknowledging that Jennifer had raised serious concerns that deserved careful consideration and thorough investigation. I mentioned that I was surprised by many of her characterizations of my behavior and leadership style, particularly given that they differed significantly from the feedback I had received from colleagues and management throughout my tenure at Brookfield. I then suggested that rather than trying to resolve these competing narratives through discussion alone, we should examine the objective evidence about my professional performance and leadership effectiveness. I mentioned that I had been documenting my work and interactions carefully, particularly given the competitive nature of the promotion process, and that I believed this documentation would provide valuable clarity about the actual facts regarding my contributions and leadership approach. Michael seemed relieved by the prospect of examining objective evidence rather than trying to adjudicate between competing subjective accounts of my professional behavior. He asked what kind of documentation I had available and whether it would help clarify the issues that Jennifer had raised about my leadership style and collaborative approach. I reached into my portfolio and began to retrieve the comprehensive files I had prepared, knowing that what happened next would determine not only the outcome of the promotion competition, but the future trajectory of my career at Brookfield Communications. The truth was about to be revealed, and Jennifer's carefully constructed campaign of deception was about to collapse under the weight of evidence and fact. I opened my portfolio and placed the first document on Michael's desk. It was a comprehensive timeline of the Henderson Industries campaign, complete with email timestamps, project milestones, and client communication records. The documentation showed clearly that the campaign had been conceived, developed, and implemented between March and August of the previous year, while Jennifer's employment start date at Brookfield was clearly marked as January of this year. This timeline shows the actual development of the Henderson campaign, I said calmly, watching Jennifer's face as she realized what I was presenting. As you can see, every major strategic decision, client presentation, and implementation milestone occurred before Jennifer joined our team. Her detailed knowledge of the campaign comes from the comprehensive project files I shared with her during our mentoring sessions, not from direct involvement in its creation or management. Michael studied the timeline carefully, cross-referencing dates with employment records that he pulled from his desk drawer. The evidence was irrefutable. Jennifer had been describing someone else's work as her own professional experience, transforming secondhand knowledge into false claims about her leadership capabilities and strategic expertise. Jennifer attempted to maintain her composure, but I could see the panic beginning to form behind her professional facade. "Sarah, I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said, her voice slightly strained. "I never claimed to have developed the Henderson campaign. I was discussing the insights I gained from studying the project and the strategic principles I learned from reviewing your excellent work." "Actually," I replied, reaching for the digital recorder in my pocket, "I have a recording of this conversation that captures exactly what you claimed about your involvement in the Henderson campaign. Would you like to hear your specific words about managing client relationships and developing strategic presentations?" The color drained from Jennifer's face as she realized that her carefully crafted misrepresentations had been documented. Michael leaned forward, his expression shifting from confusion to serious concern as he began to understand the implications of what was unfolding in his office. I played back the portion of the recording where Jennifer had described her supposed leadership of the Henderson campaign, letting her own words demonstrate the extent of her deception. Her confident claims about managing client communications, developing strategic frameworks, and navigating challenging stakeholder relationships were captured with perfect clarity, along with the tone of authority and expertise she had used to present these false achievements. When the recording ended, the silence in the room was profound. Michael stared at Jennifer with an expression that combined disappointment, anger, and professional concern. Jennifer sat motionless, apparently realizing that her campaign of deception had been thoroughly exposed, and that any attempt to explain or justify her false claims would only make the situation worse. But I wasn't finished. The Henderson campaign was just one example of Jennifer's systematic misrepresentation of her qualifications and achievements. I had documentation of multiple instances where she had appropriated my work, spread false information about my leadership style, and manipulated workplace relationships for her own advancement. The Henderson campaign isn't an isolated incident, I continued, placing additional documents on Michael's desk. Over the past several weeks, I've been documenting a pattern of behavior that includes false claims about project involvement, systematic character assassination, and deliberate manipulation of professional relationships. I showed Michael the email records that proved my individual ownership and development of various strategic frameworks that Jennifer had presented as her own insights. The timestamps and collaboration patterns were clear and objective, showing that Jennifer had systematically studied my work and then presented key elements as evidence of her own strategic thinking and analytical capabilities. Next, I played recordings of Jennifer's conversations with colleagues where she had spread false information about my leadership style and collaborative approach. The recordings captured her claiming that I was dismissive of team input, resistant to alternative perspectives, and responsible for creating negative team dynamics. Each accusation was specific enough to sound credible while being completely fabricated. Michael listened to these recordings with growing alarm, realizing that Jennifer had been conducting what amounted to a systematic disinformation campaign designed to destroy my professional reputation while enhancing her own perceived qualifications for promotion. The sophistication and calculated nature of her approach was becoming undeniably clear. "Jennifer," Michael said finally, his voice carrying a tone of professional authority that I had never heard him use before. "These recordings suggest that you've been making false statements about Sarah's work performance and leadership capabilities. Can you explain why you would share these concerns with colleagues rather than addressing them through proper channels if you believed they were legitimate issues?" Jennifer's carefully constructed professional persona finally began to crack. Under the pressure of being confronted with indisputable evidence of her deception, she struggled to formulate a response that could somehow justify or explain away the recordings. But there was simply no credible explanation for the systematic nature of her false claims. "I was trying to be helpful," she said weakly, her confidence completely eroded. "I thought I was sharing legitimate observations about team dynamics. I never intended to hurt Sarah's reputation or prospects for advancement." But these aren't observations, I interjected, producing another set of documents. These are fabricated incidents. The specific examples you gave of my supposedly dismissive behavior during team meetings never occurred. I have meeting minutes and witness statements from colleagues who were present during every interaction you described. I handed Michael a file containing detailed records of team meetings, brainstorming sessions, and collaborative projects where Jennifer had claimed I exhibited poor leadership behavior. The documentation included meeting minutes, email follow-ups, and feedback from participants that directly contradicted every accusation Jennifer had made about my interactions with colleagues. David Kim had provided a written statement confirming that the incidents Jennifer described had never taken place, and that his actual experience of my leadership style was consistently collaborative and inclusive. Several junior staff members had also provided statements describing positive mentoring relationships and supportive interactions that directly contradicted Jennifer's characterizations of my approach to team management. Michael reviewed these materials with methodical thoroughness, comparing Jennifer's specific accusations with the objective evidence of what had actually occurred during team interactions. The contrast was stark and undeniable. Jennifer had constructed detailed false narratives about incidents that could be proven never to have happened. As the evidence mounted, Jennifer's position became increasingly untenable. She had been caught in multiple specific lies about both her own qualifications and my professional behavior. More importantly, the systematic nature of her deception revealed a level of calculated manipulation that went far beyond simple workplace competition or honest misunderstandings about project responsibilities. "There's more," I said, producing the final piece of evidence that would complete the picture of Jennifer's campaign against me. I also have documentation of Jennifer's conversation with Lisa Chen in Human Resources, where she made formal allegations about my creating a toxic work environment. These allegations were based on the same fabricated incidents that we've just discussed. I played the recording of Jennifer's conversation with Lisa, where she had presented herself as a concerned colleague, reluctantly sharing difficult observations about my alleged leadership deficiencies. The recording captured her making specific false claims about my behavior, while positioning herself as someone who is professionally obligated to report these issues for the good of the organization. Michael's expression grew increasingly grim as he listened to Jennifer systematically spreading false information to Human Resources while maintaining the facade of reluctant professionalism. The conversation revealed that Jennifer hadn't simply been competing for the promotion through questionable means. She had been actively trying to damage my career prospects and professional reputation through false allegations that could have resulted in disciplinary action or termination. When the recording ended, Michael immediately reached for his phone to call Lisa Chen. Within minutes, Lisa arrived at the office to review the evidence and assess the serious implications of Jennifer's false reporting to Human Resources. The situation had evolved beyond a simple promotion competition into a case of potential harassment, defamation, and policy violations that required immediate investigation and resolution. Lisa listened to all of the recordings and reviewed the documentary evidence with the thoroughness of an experienced HR professional who recognized the gravity of the situation. Jennifer's behavior represented multiple violations of company policy, including harassment of a colleague, false reporting to management, and deliberate sabotage of another employee's career advancement opportunities. "Jennifer," Lisa said finally, her tone reflecting the seriousness of the situation. "These recordings and documents suggest a pattern of behavior that violates several fundamental policies regarding workplace conduct, professional integrity, and employee relations. We'll need to conduct a formal investigation, but based on the evidence presented here, I'm placing you on administrative leave, effective immediately pending the completion of our review." Jennifer's composure finally collapsed completely as she realized that her campaign of deception had not only failed, but had resulted in serious consequences for her own employment and professional reputation. She attempted to argue that the recordings had been taken out of context or that her statements had been misinterpreted, but the evidence was too comprehensive and specific to be explained away through claims of misunderstanding. "I want you to understand," Lisa continued, "that the behaviors documented here represent serious violations of our policies regarding harassment, defamation, and professional conduct. The systematic nature of these actions suggests deliberate intent to damage a colleague's career through false statements and manipulated information. These are not minor workplace disagreements or honest misunderstandings about project responsibilities." As Jennifer gathered her belongings and left the office under Lisa's escort, I felt a mixture of relief, vindication, and sadness. Relief that the truth had finally been revealed and that my professional reputation could be restored through objective evidence rather than subjective judgments about competing narratives. Vindication that my decision to document Jennifer's behavior had proven correct and had provided the proof needed to expose her systematic deception. But I also felt sadness about how the situation had unfolded. I had genuinely tried to mentor Jennifer and had initially believed that her interest in learning from my experience was sincere. The discovery that she had been systematically studying my work and relationships in order to appropriate my achievements and sabotage my career was deeply disappointing on a personal level. Michael and I spent the remainder of the morning discussing the implications of what had been revealed and planning the steps needed to address the damage that Jennifer's campaign had caused to team dynamics and departmental relationships. Several colleagues had been influenced by Jennifer's false claims about my leadership style, and Michael wanted to ensure that accurate information was communicated to restore confidence in my professional capabilities. "Sarah," Michael said as our conversation drew to a close, "I owe you a significant apology for allowing Jennifer's false statements to influence my perception of your qualifications and leadership potential. Your professionalism in documenting and presenting this evidence has been remarkable, and it demonstrates exactly the kind of careful, systematic thinking that we need in department leadership." The promotion decision was announced the following week, and I was officially appointed as marketing manager with a start date that would allow for a smooth transition and the development of strategic plans for the department's continued growth. Michael emphasized that the decision was based not only on my documented achievements and demonstrated capabilities, but also on the integrity and professionalism I had shown throughout the challenging situation with Jennifer. Jennifer's termination was finalized after a brief investigation that confirmed all of the policy violations documented in our evidence. The investigation also revealed additional instances where Jennifer had misrepresented her qualifications during the hiring process, including false claims about her previous experience and responsibilities at her prior employer in Los Angeles. Word of Jennifer's deception spread quickly through professional networks in Phoenix's marketing community, effectively ending her career prospects in the local market. The specific nature of her misconduct, involving systematic appropriation of colleagues' work and deliberate character assassination, made it virtually impossible for her to find comparable employment with other agencies or corporations in the region. 6 months later, our department had been transformed under my leadership as marketing manager. The collaborative approaches and mentoring programs I implemented created an environment where team members could develop their skills and contribute their ideas without fear of having their work appropriated or their efforts undermined by colleagues seeking personal advancement. The Peterson campaign, which had been the subject of our final presentations during the promotion process, became one of our most successful client relationships under my management. The strategic framework I had developed proved highly effective in helping Peterson expand their market presence, resulting in a long-term partnership that brought substantial revenue to Brookfield and enhanced our reputation for delivering innovative solutions to complex business challenges. Most importantly, we established new protocols for project documentation and credit attribution that would prevent future incidents of work appropriation or false claims about individual contributions. These policies created transparency about team member roles and responsibilities, while protecting everyone's professional achievements and career development opportunities. The experience taught me valuable lessons about the importance of documenting professional achievements and defending against workplace manipulation through systematic evidence gathering rather than emotional responses or confrontational approaches. I learned that integrity and truth, when properly documented and presented, are more powerful than deception and manipulation, even when the lies initially appear to be winning. I also gained a deeper appreciation for the complexity of workplace dynamics and the importance of maintaining vigilance about professional relationships and team interactions. While I continued to believe in collaborative approaches and mentoring relationships, I became more careful about sharing sensitive information and more attentive to signs that colleagues might be misusing trust for personal advancement. The situation with Jennifer had been challenging and professionally dangerous, but it ultimately strengthened my leadership capabilities and enhanced my understanding of how to build and maintain ethical workplace cultures. The experience of exposing systematic deception through careful documentation and evidence presentation became a model for addressing similar challenges throughout my subsequent career. 3 years later, I was promoted to Senior Marketing Director, overseeing multiple departments and managing strategic relationships with Brookfield's largest clients. The lessons learned from the Jennifer situation continued to inform my approach to leadership development, team management, and professional relationship building throughout my advancement within the company. The most satisfying aspect of my continued success was knowing that it had been built on authentic achievements, genuine collaborative relationships, and ethical professional practices. Unlike Jennifer's attempted advancement through deception and manipulation, my career progression was based on measurable results, positive team outcomes, and the kind of integrity that creates sustainable success rather than temporary advantages gained through false claims. Looking back on the entire experience, I realized that Jennifer's campaign against me had ultimately revealed more about her character than it had damaged mine. Her willingness to systematically lie, steal credit for others' work, and deliberately sabotage a colleague's career demonstrated fundamental deficiencies in professional ethics that would have eventually led to problems regardless of the immediate outcome of our promotion competition. The truth had indeed surfaced at exactly the right moment, but only because I had made the strategic decision to document and preserve evidence rather than simply hoping that honest work would speak for itself. In competitive professional environments, protecting your reputation and achievements requires active vigilance and systematic record-keeping, not just confidence in the ultimate triumph of truth and integrity. The recording device that had captured Jennifer's false claims became a symbol of the importance of being prepared to defend against workplace manipulation and deception. While I hoped never to need such protection again, I continued to maintain careful documentation of my professional interactions and achievements as a standard practice throughout my career. Jennifer's story became a cautionary tale within Brookfield's corporate culture, illustrating the consequences of attempting to build a career on appropriated achievements and false claims, rather than genuine contribution and ethical behavior. Her downfall served as a reminder that sustainable success requires authentic capability and integrity, rather than sophisticated manipulation and strategic deception. The experience ultimately strengthened both my professional capabilities and my confidence in the power of systematic truth-telling to overcome even the most calculated campaigns of lies and character assassination. Justice had been served not through dramatic confrontation or emotional appeals, but through careful documentation, objective evidence, and the patient accumulation of facts that could not be disputed or explained away. The weeks following Jennifer's termination brought unexpected challenges that I hadn't anticipated during the intensity of exposing her deception. While the immediate crisis had been resolved and justice had been served, the ripple effects of her systematic manipulation campaign had created lasting damage to team dynamics and departmental relationships that required careful attention and strategic healing. Several colleagues approached me privately to express their embarrassment about having been influenced by Jennifer's false narratives about my leadership style. David Kim was particularly troubled by his realization that he had begun to question our friendship based on Jennifer's subtle suggestions that I was becoming increasingly difficult to work with. The guilt he felt about doubting someone he had known and respected for years was evident in every conversation we had during this period. Maria Santos, one of our junior analysts, revealed that Jennifer had approached her multiple times with leading questions about my management approach and collaborative style. Jennifer had framed these conversations as informal mentoring discussions, but Maria now understood that they had been intelligence-gathering missions designed to collect ammunition for character assassination. The sophistication of Jennifer's approach to manipulating workplace relationships was becoming clearer as more colleagues came forward with similar experiences. Most disturbing was the revelation from Tom Rodriguez in our creative department that Jennifer had tried to recruit him as an ally by suggesting that my promotion would result in reduced creative freedom and increased micromanagement of the design process. Jennifer had apparently studied our departmental structure carefully enough to identify potential pressure points and individual concerns that could be exploited to build opposition to my advancement. These conversations with colleagues helped me understand the full scope of Jennifer's campaign, while also revealing how many people had been uncomfortable with her approaches, but hadn't known how to respond appropriately. Several team members mentioned that they had sensed something manipulative about Jennifer's questions and observations, but had dismissed their concerns as workplace paranoia or competitive jealousy. The healing process required rebuilding trust and confidence that had been systematically undermined through months of subtle manipulation and false information. I spent considerable time in one-on-one conversations with team members, addressing concerns that had been planted by Jennifer's campaign, while also demonstrating through consistent behavior that my actual leadership style bore no resemblance to the negative characterizations she had spread. Michael proved to be an invaluable partner in this reconstruction effort. He recognized that Jennifer's deception had created institutional damage that extended beyond the immediate harm to my reputation and career prospects. The incident had revealed vulnerabilities in our department's communication patterns and relationship management that needed to be addressed to prevent similar situations from occurring in the future. Together, we developed new protocols for team communication, project attribution, and conflict resolution that would create transparency about individual contributions while protecting against future attempts at credit theft or character assassination. These changes weren't implemented as punitive responses to Jennifer's misconduct, but as positive improvements to our collaborative culture that would benefit everyone's professional development and career advancement. The new documentation standards. We established required clear attribution of strategic concepts, analytical frameworks, and creative contributions throughout the project development process. Team members were encouraged to maintain professional portfolios that tracked their individual achievements and collaborative efforts, creating an objective record that would prevent future disputes about credit and recognition. We also implemented regular feedback sessions where team members could address concerns about workplace dynamics, project management, and collaborative relationships in a structured environment that encouraged honest communication while preventing the kind of behind-the-scenes manipulation that Jennifer had employed so effectively. These systematic changes to our departmental culture attracted attention from senior leadership throughout Brookfield Communications. The incident with Jennifer had become a cautionary tale about workplace manipulation, but our response had become a model for building resilient, transparent professional environments that could resist attempts at internal sabotage and deception. Rebecca Walsh, the Vice President of Human Resources, asked me to present our new protocols to other departments as part of a company-wide initiative to strengthen professional conduct standards and improve conflict resolution processes. The presentation opportunity allowed me to share insights about recognizing and responding to workplace manipulation, while also demonstrating the leadership capabilities that had been called into question during Jennifer's campaign against me. The presentation was scheduled for a company-wide management meeting that included directors and senior staff from all departments. This was my first opportunity to address the Jennifer situation publicly and to demonstrate how the experience had informed positive changes to our organizational culture and professional development practices. Standing before an audience of senior colleagues who had undoubtedly heard various versions of the story about Jennifer's termination and my role in exposing her deception, I felt the weight of representing not just my own professional reputation, but also the broader principles of integrity and truth-telling that had guided my response to the crisis. I began the presentation by acknowledging that workplace manipulation and professional sabotage are more common than most organizations recognize, and that traditional approaches to conflict resolution are often inadequate when dealing with systematic deception rather than honest disagreements about performance or strategy. The framework I presented distinguished between ordinary workplace competition, which involves individuals promoting their own achievements and capabilities, and destructive manipulation, which involves systematic efforts to damage colleagues' reputations while appropriating their work and accomplishments. Understanding this distinction was crucial for managers and HR professionals who needed to respond appropriately to different types of professional conflicts. I outlined the warning signs that had emerged during Jennifer's campaign, including the pattern of private conversations with management that consistently undermined specific colleagues, the appropriation of detailed knowledge about projects and strategies that suggested unauthorized access to confidential information, and the systematic spread of character-based criticisms that were difficult to verify or disprove through objective measures. The documentation strategies I had employed became a central focus of the presentation, demonstrating how careful record-keeping and evidence collection could provide protection against false accusations while also creating accountability for professional behavior and communication. The recording of conversations, while legally permissible, was presented as a last resort for situations where other forms of documentation were insufficient to protect against systematic deception. Most importantly, I emphasized that the goal of enhanced documentation and transparency wasn't to create a defensive, suspicious workplace culture, but to establish clear standards for professional conduct that would allow collaborative relationships to flourish while preventing the kind of manipulation that Jennifer had employed so effectively. The response to the presentation was overwhelmingly positive, with several department directors requesting follow-up consultations about implementing similar protocols in their own teams. The Human Resources Department began developing company-wide policies based on the frameworks we had created, recognizing that the lessons learned from the Jennifer situation had broader applicability for protecting organizational culture and employee welfare. 6 months after my promotion to marketing manager, our department's performance metrics had improved dramatically across every measurable category. Client satisfaction scores reached the highest levels in Brookfield's history. Employee engagement within our team increased by 47%, and our successful project completion rate improved by 32% compared to the previous year's performance. The Peterson campaign that had been discussed during the promotion competition became our flagship success story under my leadership. The strategic approach I had outlined during those contentious presentations proved highly effective in helping Peterson achieve their market expansion goals while establishing Brookfield as their long-term strategic partner for all marketing and branding initiatives. More significantly, the collaborative methodologies we had implemented attracted attention from other clients who were seeking marketing partners capable of delivering both creative excellence and strategic rigor. Our reputation for transparent project management and clear attribution of individual contributions became a competitive advantage that differentiated us from other agencies in the Phoenix market. The success of these initiatives led to my appointment as the lead presenter for Brookfield's new business development efforts, a role that involved creating strategic proposals for potential clients, while also representing the company at industry conferences and professional networking events. This visibility provided opportunities to share insights about ethical leadership and collaborative team management with peers throughout the marketing and advertising community. During one particularly memorable industry conference in Denver, I was approached by Elena Rodriguez, a marketing director from a competing agency who had heard about the Jennifer situation through professional networks. Elena shared that her own company had recently experienced a similar incident involving an employee who had been systematically appropriating colleagues' work while spreading false information about their professional capabilities. Elena's story revealed that Jennifer's approach to workplace manipulation wasn't unique or innovative, but represented a recognizable pattern of behavior that had been documented in other organizations across various industries. The specificity of Jennifer's methods, including the systematic study of colleagues' work histories and the strategic targeting of key decision-makers, suggested a level of calculation that went beyond ordinary workplace competition or professional jealousy. This conversation with Elena led to broader discussions within professional organizations about the need for enhanced awareness and protection against systematic workplace manipulation. I was invited to contribute to articles in industry publications about recognizing and responding to professional sabotage, sharing insights that could help other managers and employees protect themselves against similar campaigns of deception. The most rewarding aspect of these speaking and writing opportunities was hearing from individuals who had experienced similar situations but hadn't known how to respond effectively. Many had suffered career damage from false accusations or credit theft, without understanding that systematic documentation could provide protection and accountability for professional misconduct. One particularly touching response came from Janet Chen, a marketing professional in San Diego who had read my article about workplace manipulation in Marketing Today magazine. Janet described how she had been systematically undermined by a colleague who had appropriated her strategic frameworks while spreading false information about her collaborative approach and leadership potential. Unlike my situation with Jennifer, Janet hadn't documented the manipulation campaign and had been unable to prove that her colleague's accusations were false rather than honest professional observations. The incident had resulted in Janet being passed over for promotion, while her manipulative colleague advanced to the position that should have been hers based on actual merit and achievement. Janet's experience reinforced my understanding that the documentation strategies I had employed weren't just defensive measures, but essential professional survival skills in competitive environments where some individuals were willing to succeed. Through deception rather than genuine contribution, the ability to protect and prove one's own achievements had become as important as the ability to produce excellent work. These interactions with other professionals who had faced similar challenges led to the development of a workshop series that I presented at various industry conferences and professional development events. The workshops focused on practical strategies for maintaining professional documentation, recognizing manipulation tactics, and responding effectively to workplace sabotage while maintaining ethical standards and collaborative relationships. The workshop content covered everything from basic project documentation techniques to advanced strategies for recording and preserving evidence of professional misconduct. Participants learned how to create comprehensive portfolios of their achievements, establish clear attribution for collaborative efforts, and build professional networks that could provide support and verification when their contributions were questioned or challenged. 2 years after the Jennifer incident, I was promoted to Senior Marketing Director with responsibility for overseeing multiple departments and managing strategic relationships with Brookfield's largest corporate clients. The promotion was based on demonstrated results in team leadership, client relationship management, and organizational development rather than political maneuvering or strategic positioning. The interview process for this promotion included detailed discussions about my experience managing the Jennifer situation and the systematic changes we had implemented to strengthen departmental culture and professional conduct standards. Senior leadership viewed my handling of that crisis as evidence of the kind of strategic thinking and ethical leadership that would be valuable at higher levels of organizational responsibility. In my new role, I had the opportunity to implement the lessons learned from the Jennifer experience across multiple departments and client relationships. The documentation standards and transparency protocols that had been developed for our marketing team became models for other areas of the company, creating consistency in professional conduct expectations and conflict resolution procedures. The most significant change was the establishment of what became known as the Professional Integrity Initiative. a company-wide program that provided training, resources, and support for employees dealing with workplace manipulation, credit theft, or character assassination. The program included confidential reporting mechanisms, investigation procedures, and protection protocols for individuals who came forward with evidence of professional misconduct. Jennifer's termination and the circumstances surrounding it became a case study within this initiative, demonstrating both the sophisticated methods that manipulative individuals might employ and the systematic approaches that could be used to expose and address such behavior. The case study was presented anonymously to protect everyone's privacy while still providing valuable learning opportunities for managers and employees throughout the organization. The success of the Professional Integrity Initiative attracted attention from other companies in Phoenix's business community, leading to consulting opportunities where I helped other organizations develop similar programs tailored to their specific industries and workplace cultures. These consulting projects provided additional perspective on how manipulation and sabotage manifested in different professional environments, while reinforcing the universal importance of documentation, transparency, and ethical leadership. 5 years after the Jennifer incident, I reflected on how that challenging experience had ultimately accelerated my professional development and enhanced my understanding of leadership, integrity, and organizational culture. While I wouldn't have chosen to face systematic manipulation and character assassination, the experience had taught valuable lessons that informed every subsequent decision and relationship throughout my career. The most important insight was recognizing that professional success requires both excellent work performance and active protection of one's reputation and achievements. In competitive environments, the assumption that good work will automatically be recognized and appropriately credited can be dangerously naive. Systematic documentation and careful relationship management aren't signs of paranoia or defensiveness, but essential skills for career advancement and professional sustainability. I also learned that responding to workplace manipulation requires strategic thinking rather than emotional reactions. The temptation to confront deceptive behavior directly or to respond to false accusations through argument and debate is often counterproductive. Instead, systematic evidence collection and careful presentation of objective facts provide more reliable protection against character assassination and credit theft. Perhaps most significantly, the experience demonstrated that integrity and truth-telling, when properly documented and strategically presented, are more powerful than manipulation and deception in the long term. While Jennifer's campaign had initially appeared successful and had created genuine threats to my career prospects, the systematic nature of her deception ultimately led to its exposure and her complete professional downfall. The contrast between our respective career trajectories in the years following the incident validated the importance of building success on authentic achievements rather than appropriated accomplishments. While my career continued to advance based on measurable results and ethical leadership, Jennifer's reputation had been permanently damaged by the exposure of her systematic deception, making it virtually impossible for her to find comparable employment in the marketing industry. This outcome reinforced my belief that sustainable professional success requires genuine capability, ethical behavior, and authentic relationship building, rather than sophisticated manipulation and strategic positioning. While deceptive tactics might produce temporary advantages, they create vulnerabilities that eventually lead to exposure and consequences that far exceed any initial benefits. The Jennifer situation had tested everything I believed about fairness, integrity, and professional conduct, while ultimately strengthening my commitment to these principles and enhancing my ability to protect and promote them in leadership roles. The experience had been challenging and professionally dangerous, but it had also provided invaluable insights that informed more effective and ethical approaches to team management, organizational development, and career advancement. Looking back on the entire experience, I realized that Jennifer's campaign against me had ultimately revealed more about her character than it had threatened mine. Her willingness to systematically lie, appropriate others' achievements, and deliberately sabotage colleagues' careers demonstrated fundamental deficiencies in professional ethics that would have created problems regardless of immediate competitive outcomes. The truth had indeed surfaced at exactly the right moment, but only because I had made strategic decisions to document and preserve evidence rather than simply trusting that honest work would speak for itself. In competitive professional environments, protecting one's reputation and achievements requires active vigilance and systematic preparation, not just confidence in eventual justice or the ultimate triumph of merit over manipulation. The experience became a defining moment in my professional development, establishing principles and practices that guided every subsequent challenge and opportunity throughout my career. The documentation habits, relationship management strategies, and ethical frameworks that emerged from that crisis became permanent elements of my leadership approach, providing both protection against future threats and models for supporting colleagues who faced similar challenges. Most importantly, the experience reinforced my understanding that individual integrity and professional success are interconnected rather than competing priorities. The systematic approach to truth-telling and evidence-based decision-making that had exposed Jennifer's deception became the foundation for building teams and organizational cultures where ethical behavior was rewarded and manipulative tactics were quickly identified and addressed. The legacy of the Jennifer incident extended far beyond the immediate resolution of a workplace conflict or the outcome of a single promotion competition. It became a catalyst for personal growth, professional development, and organizational change that created lasting benefits for everyone involved in building more transparent, accountable, and ethical workplace cultures. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.